You have just enjoyed The Garden Beyond, an excellent film about William Soutar. I'm delighted to say that the Scottish Poetry Library, where we are now, controls the copyright thanks to the gifting of them by the producer Douglas Eadie, who joins us. Douglas, let's chat about that really fascinating film. First of all, tell us why that needed to be made in 1977, in your opinion.
Well, that was the run-up to the first devolution referendum, the one that was sabotaged by Labour demanding a majority of those who actually voted, of those on the
voter roll.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Which meant that McDermott voted no.
I wasn't aware of that.
Because he died before, but his name was still in the voters' roll. So there you are. So it was part of that. I mean, Chief at the Stag and the Blackback Oil was another part of it, and we were just, it just seemed to be the right time to make a film. And I always thought that Soutar, being bedridden and not exactly inactive, but limited, and a middle-class poet in the middle of Scotland, so there's a certain metaphor there of bedriddenness being a kind of a metaphor for Scotland. We didn't hearken that, but it's there in the film. I think. I hope it's there in the film because it was very much in our minds as we were putting it together, with McDermott on the left and Soutar's great friend, the painter Jim Finlayson, on the right, and Soutar again in the middle. Yeah.
So we were chatting off camera and you told me that actually you're a Perth lad yourself and that you have personal connections to the people we see in the film. How did that inform the film?
Well, I think I like to think that it softened it a little bit. I didn't want it to become too kind of programmatic as a debate between left and right. We wanted to humanise it a bit as well. And that was easy for me coming from Perth. My father actually worked for John Soutar, William's father, and they were elders in the same church together. And I remember sitting there watching John Soutar. He was like something out of Crowdy Now, he was a really grim kind of man, So I put my father. In writing the script, I put my father into it in a couple of ways. The story about the joiner that Soutar's talking to talks about being in the USA and California and tossing a coin at Brooklyn Bridge, deciding to, if it came with tails, he was going back home. So he came back. That was my father. And if it hadn't come up tails, I wouldn't be here. I might have gone to California and I might have become Steven Spielberg, but
exactly.
That's a wee bit unlikely.
But we wouldn't have got that film, so you can keep Jurassic Park.
Yeah, so that was quite. I have to say that, and it was kind of a kind of consequence of the way things were back then. We had too many Glaswegian West Coast accents in it. That's one thing I would regard as a valid criticism of it.
Aye. Should we overdub it with some Perthshire accents? Get some of Dundee boys in it and stuff.
The other thing I regret is the naked girl. If only because back then that made the film impossible to be shown in schools.
Uh-huh.
I think other than that, if we hadn't done that, we'd done it in some kind of much less directed way, I think we could have had that film going into schools quite a bit.
It was a scene that made me slightly uncomfortable, and certainly to modern tastes it feels unnecessary. Like it is like, just because the film feels so male, like all the main characters that have any ideas or anything to say are male. Obviously it was a sexist time. If you look at the Renaissance Scots poets, there's a great collection of Kiss the Skinkling Things, which collects a lot of their great work, and there is a heavy preponderance of male poets in that. So it's a fair reflection of the era. But there is that thing of a woman comes in, doesn't get to say a word, and is just a naked prop.
Well, you have seen before you see that, you see a very fine Scottish singer, and there is of course Soutar's mother in it. But Soutar didn't talk much about his mother in his diaries and so on. So I don't know. But yeah, making it again, I think Brian Trumlish would agree with me that we made a bit of a mistake there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such a good film, and not being able to show it in schools, I hadn't realised that.
On the other hand, it was the first Scottish film to get independently made Scottish film to get a network premiere. It was the first Scottish film to have full frontal nudity. So there we go.
Fantastic. No, there's plenty there. And so, where do your sympathies lie in that great McDermott Souter? They have so many good Rammies across the film. Where do your sympathies lie? Are you just a Perth man and therefore you're back in Souter? Or?
I'm probably more like Souter, yeah, in the middle, yeah, bedridden, intellectually bedridden. Smitten by not being able to raise the funding for films. You know?
So tell me as well about Souter's work, because that's something that comes across, I think, well. I think it's something that the film does really well, is gets you an understanding of what he was producing, why he was producing it, where it's coming from intellectually for him. How do you feel about Souter's work yourself?
I love the Bairn rhymes. I think these are wonderful. Some of the other ones are kind of the same poem over and over again, the same structure and the same length and so on. But I think had he gone on longer, he would have gone on to bigger things, as McDermott suggests he should be. But
yeah, I must say that the little lyric that is read over the top of the woman making her appearance, softly cam she in.
I think that is his finest poem. I think.
Remarkable, remarkable piece of work, and it's something that stood out to me years ago when I first read it.
Yes.
And you do feel if there's a few more of them going about. But I mean, regardless, his body of work stands the test of time.
I think it does, yes. And there's I think it's a Cypriot or Greek, Philippou. Is that the name? Doing a collected works of Souter, and that's going to be all his poetry and all his prose.
Is that right? Okay, so we'll cut it there, and you'll expertly say Tippermuir Books actually have a collected works of Souter coming out soon.
Oh right, yeah, yes, I understand that there's a collected. I think it's Tippermuir Books are bringing the collected works of William Souter, which will be his poetry. And also his diaries and journals and other prose works. So that's something to look forward to. Very
much so. It's quite interesting. One final thing I'll say about it is obviously it was at the time of the devolution referendum, or the run-up to it, that this came out. He himself and his contemporaries were engaged in that discussion around what Scotland should be, how it should exist in the world. And we're recording this in 2022. It looks like there's another referendum on the horizon. We've just had another SNP victory at the polls. What do you make of the relevance of the things they're discussing in the film?
I think a lot of the themes are still there to be answered. You know, it's reading papers like the National. It's always a bit of an echo chamber, but you got to remember there's a whole majority out there that still need a bit of education. You know, and it's great that the Garden Beyond seems to have taken on a new lease of life, or has a new relevance. Yeah.
Well, I certainly hope that you watching at home have enjoyed the film, have engaged with the intellectual discussions, and from perhaps the Scottish Poetry Library's point of view, just re-accessed the beauty and power of Souter's work and a new understanding of where the Scottish Renaissance that it was birthed from, because that's something that really stood out strongly to me, was understanding how that intellectual community worked and how his bedroom did play host to much of these great discussions that are formative in Scottish poetry.
Yeah. Should we just mention the Portrait of Suter?
Please.
That was done by Sandy Muffet, kind of at the beginning of his career. Jim Finlayson, the painter, played by Bill Patterson, of course. Bill wanted to do some of the painting. And Sandy was very reluctant about that, but he allowed him to touch up one of the things at the side, and then he readjusted it after.
on the original painting?
Yeah.
You must have been sweating. That's a great insight. Douglas, thank you very much.
Pleasure, great pleasure. Thanks, Harry.